I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about why I have my graphics on low and why I recommend you doing it too. I also wanted to talk a little bit about field of view in Planetside 2. I feel like a lot of people stick to the default settings that they can only change in game. This limits people somewhat because there's a lot of settings that you can only change when you go into the files. And it may only take 5 minutes of work, but it will help you a lot in Planetside, and it is useful to do. The reason for this is simple. The rate of fire of your gun is tied to how much FPS you have unless you have smoothing turned on. And if you do have smoothing turned on, unless you go into the user options you're going to be limited in the FPS you can go up to. And so you may want to consider doing it for that. You want to have a high FPS as well, because it makes it easier to track the opponents and the game does just generally feel better. It also means you can see people a little bit quicker in terms of frames, although the main reason is just to track people better. So for those two reasons, we want to be using a high frame rate, and we also want to have smoothing on. We want to have high frame rate via having lower settings, because if you have everything on high or maxed, even if you've got a really powerful computer, if you're in a massive fight with 200 players, you're not gonna get to a stable 150 FPS, probably. Maybe if you've got like a top end, newest generation CPU and GPU, you might be able to manage it. I don't know. Maybe if you're only playing on 1080p, it might work. But especially if you're going to be playing as well on 1440p, even with a good computer on 1440p, you're probably going to struggle. So you're probably going to, for that as well, want to have lower settings to make up for the extra graphical burden 1440p induces onto your computer. So now that we have the reasons why we would want to do that, I do, before going into the settings and talking a bit more about that, want to also talk a bit about field of view. Field of view and having a high field of view is relatively important for two main reasons. The first reason is that it allows you to see more of the screen, and therefore you can see people to your left and the right. The other reason is that it does make the recoil of your gun feel a little bit less. It means that you have to compensate with your mouse a little bit less, in my opinion, and that change there will impact how well you can play Planetside relative to other people to an extent. It's not a massive issue, and the argument for playing at 74 field of view is simple. You have bigger heads that you can shoot. I do also want to mention that sometimes people do also play with stretched monitors if they really try hard, which you have to change via the resolution of your computer natively, and then it should change in game as well. The last point of why you may want to have lower settings as well, before I move on to talking about how to do it, is that it will decrease the amount of flashy things and background stuff that's distracting you and let you instead focus on the movement of the opposition instead of having a lot of other stuff going on. So those are some really good reasons to change your graphics down lower. Now it does make the gameplay look a little bit worse, maybe, to an extent, but I don't think Planetside's graphics get that bad that it's unplayable. I think about a game like Age of Empires 2 that a lot of people still play now, even though the graphics for that game aren't amazing. Even with the remastered version, it still doesn't look that amazing. And I look at a game like Call of Duty 4 and I see that, there's a pro mod scene and a really good modding scene for Call of Duty 4 on PC for like 15 years. And then Call of Duty 4 Remastered came out and it looked really good. But the game's dead because it just wasn't as good of a game because the support for mods and stuff wasn't there, which is really what people enjoyed. You can also look at recent successes like Valheim, of a good example of a game that has really good gameplay, so the graphics aren't that important for a lot of people. Now I will say that if you can have a good game that also has good graphics, that's amazing. But the reason that we want to turn down the graphics again is because you are sacrificing things by having higher graphics at the moment. And maybe, in 5 years, in 10 years, Planetside 2 Remastered or Planetside 3, we might be able to have high graphics and not have these glaring issues with the higher graphics. But for now, I really recommend turning them down. So, let's go into how to do it. The first thing we want to do is go into power options and make sure we have high performance enabled. Afterwards, we want to type in adjust the appearance and performance of Windows, and we want to disable these settings. Now this is not only going to give you 1 or 2 or 3 extra FPS, it's also going to make Windows a little bit easier to use. Next, I want you to go into Task Manager. I want you to go to the Startup tab and disable any startup applications that you don't want to automatically start up. Afterwards, I want you to open the Planetside 2 launcher and click Open Game Directory. Afterwards, there's going to be some graphic settings that you're going to want to turn down. Now these are the potato graphic settings, the lowest that you can get. I actually don't recommend doing this and instead changing these values here to be a bit higher, which gives you a good middle ground between really low graphics and just like, I'd say like medium graphics without any crazy animations, and that should make the game feel a lot better without sacrificing too much. In terms of maximum FPS, you may also want to go for, say, 200 is a good place to go for if you have a 144Hz monitor. If you only have a 60Hz monitor, something like 100 FPS should be fine. And that's assuming that you have smoothing turned on. If you have smoothing turned off and for whatever reason you really don't want to turn smoothing on, then you may want to increase your FPS to at least 150. Because otherwise you are going to have damage per second being lower from your high rated fire guns. Now on AMD I believe there's also a system similar to this, but on NVIDIA you can right click, go to your control panel, and then you can change the contrast and vibrancy of the monitor, which might make it pop a little bit more and make the game feel a little bit more alive. And so even though you've got the graphics a little bit lower, the game might seem a bit more colourful with this change. Now increasing the vibrancy of the colours basically makes a lot of the dimmer colours higher in terms of its colour. And so if you do this, it's just not going to be an accurate representation of what the artists intended, and instead you are going to be making everything a bit exaggerated in terms of colours. You can also change your render distance quite a lot. I would recommend for anyone that does have FPS issues, really you don't want to go above 300 render distance for infantry. You're not going to notice anything farther than that. The only time is if you want to see repair galaxy or galaxies in general coming in from far away to drop on point. As infantry, that's the only thing that would ever matter to you above 300 meters. For vehicles, I believe they do on land render at 1400 meters or something, and then air is around 2000 meters. So anything above that probably isn't going to affect you at all. Also, make sure that you have wide view mode enabled if you decide to increase your field of view in your settings. As you probably know, you can't change your field of view above 74 in game, and the devs are totally fine with this, you can change it in the user options innie. Generally speaking, people recommend 80 is a good place to be. You can go to something like 84, and anything above that you are going to start to get a fisheye effect. Some people do really enjoy and swear by 90 field of view, and that's probably the higher end of where you want to be. Lastly, you may also want to install a crosshair which will help with aiming a bit better. You can type into GitHub crossover, download that and install it. Make sure to set up a hotkey that makes it easy to disable, easy to re-enable. So that would be like F10, F11, F12. Those buttons are usually good for hotkeys for this game. Now I would love to hear if you guys have any of your own tips or anything I could improve with this guide in the next version. I would love to hear. I'm going to do a separate video on raw Excel and setting that up to auto start with Windows. But that's for another video. Until next time, have a great day. GG, I'm out. Bye bye.